So with that, it's an absolute honor to be able to present the next speaker, Barbara Burton. I take things from at the bench, you know. We play in the laboratory, we play in our sort of domain and mix things and blow things up. But actually seeing things progress, again, nothing could have taken place without Barbara's work, both in Kuvan, PEG-PAL, and all the programs that she's connecting now to the patients themselves. So we really look forward to your talk, Barbara.
Good morning. Ray Stevens is such a hard act to follow. I feel very intimidated, but that was such a great talk and gave us such great insight into how much goes into the background of drug development. You know, you can see the complexity and the years that are involved before something even gets to the point of a clinical trial. I'd like to just start again by thanking you all for allowing me to be here. It's such an exciting time, and this is such a important gathering, and I'm so impressed with everything that you've accomplished. I am real old school, and I just barely learned to do PowerPoint. Certainly can't do anything like animation or anything like that, like we saw in Ray's talk. But as I was flipping through the little formats they have, you can choose to make your slide. I saw the fireworks, and I thought, wow, how incredibly appropriate for this meeting. It's such a cause for celebration that this is finally come into being, that we should be setting off fireworks. So, you know, it just caught my eye. I thought I have to go with that. So what we're going to talk about today are some of the new treatment developments that have come along for PKU. And just as Ray pointed out, it feels so great to be able to be in the clinic, seeing patients with PKU, and knowing that we do have therapeutic options. It's very challenging to maintain good Phe levels. We have a number of different things we can do now to try to make that come about, and it's incredible. So we're going to talk about Kuvan. We'll talk a little bit about PEG-PAL. You've heard the development of both of these things and a little bit about how they work, and then we'll touch on the home Phe monitor that's being developed currently by BioMarin. So first, let's start with Kuvan. What is Kuvan? Well, it's the first FDA-approved product for the treatment of PKU. It's been approved by the FDA for several years now, and now readily available to us in clinical practice. You heard from Dr. Stevens that it is a form of BH4 or tetrahydrobiopterin, the helper, the cofactor helper for making that PAH reaction work and convert phenylalanine to tyrosine. The generic name of the drug is sapropterin, which means that it's a synthetic form of this BH4 cofactor. And this is animation, but I didn't create it. Somebody gave it to me, but I think it's kind of nice. And it shows again how the BH4 or Kuvan works. We know that in patients with PKU, that PAH enzyme's not working properly because it falls apart or just does not do its job correctly, and so the phenylalanine levels rise and the tyrosine levels go down. But when we give a patient Kuvan, it helps the PAH do its job to convert phenylalanine to tyrosine. So it really activates the body's own ability to convert Phe to tyrosine. We know some patients have hardly any ability on their own to do it if you have PKU, classical PKU, but some patients have a little bit of ability to do it. You know that on an unrestricted diet there's lots of variation in how high Phe levels will go, and that in part has to do with how much activity of this PAH enzyme you have, even if you have PKU. And Kuvan really activates what little bit is there to do that job better and lower Phe levels. It only works for 40 to 50% of patients with PKU. For some, it doesn't work at all. Their enzyme just immediately falls apart, can't be activated by Kuvan. But for 40 to 50%, we do see a response to the drug with lowering of blood Phe levels. And at this point, The only way to know for sure if you're going to respond to Kuvan is to try it with the responsiveness test. Maybe one day, as the studies on the genotype-phenotype correlation progress, we'll be able to look at your mutations and tell that way, but right now, no, we can't. So every patient needs to have the responsiveness test to determine if you will respond to Kuvan. So how does that responsiveness testing work? I know many of you in the room are on Kuvan, so you're very familiar with this, but some of you may not have had the opportunity to try it yet. The way that we do the testing to determine if Kuvan's going to work for you is that you basically start taking the medication, and you do it during a time when you're keeping your diet very steady. Nothing else is really changing about your treatment, because we want to be able to tell if we're seeing a change, if it's due to the Kuvan, and if you're changing lots of things all at one time, we can't tell really what's responsible for that change. So you need to keep your diet steady. You start taking the medication. It's taken once a day with the dose determined by body weight. So your clinic tells you how many tablets you need to take once a day, and they can either be just swallowed as intact tablets like aspirin tablets, or they can be dissolved in water or apple juice. You need to obtain a blood Phe level just before you start it, so you know what your starting point or your baseline is, and then you'll obtain several Phe levels while you're on the medication, so you can see if there's a change. And if the medication works for you, there should be a decline in the blood Phe level. Now, one caveat for that is that if you start the medication with a low Phe level, let's say you're in very good control with your diet and your Phe levels are running about 2 or somewhere in there, you will not necessarily see that drop in the blood Phe level, even if Kuvan works for you. So what we do in those cases is gradually add more Phe back to the diet to see if your Phe tolerance is increased on the medication. And certainly if your Phe tolerance is increased, that also is indicative of a response to the medication. So I just want to give you a couple of examples from my own practice of how Kuvan works for individual patients, because it's different in different circumstances. There are different reasons why you might want to try going on the medication, depending on your starting point. And so here's one example. This is a patient that I had the pleasure of taking care of for a number of years. He just recently moved to another state, but he was 32 years of age, and he was actually, I think, in his late 20s when we first met him. He had recently moved to Illinois. He was new to our clinic, and stated that he had PKU but had been off dietary therapy for many, many years. He's now been on Kuvan for over 3 years, but I'm going to tell you how that all came about. So we saw him, and his initial blood level was between 16, 17, in that range. And he had lots of symptoms that we know are very common in adults who've been off diet and have poorly controlled PKU. He had only intermittently been able to maintain employment. He had a lot of problems with depression, a lot of problems with attention span, a lot of phobias, a lot of different neurocognitive and psychiatric symptoms. He had been receiving psychiatric care intermittently, was on medication for depression. And he wanted treatment for his PKU. He understood that a lot of the things he was experiencing could be attributed to his PKU. And he was willing to try dietary therapy, but he felt like it was going to be really difficult for him. And we were just at the point of starting the Kuvan trial, so he wanted to try Kuvan first. And he had very good response to Kuvan. His average blood Phe levels on Kuvan, right around 369 micromoles per liter. That's about 6 milligrams per deciliter. So he had a very good response in terms of his Phe level. He's continued on an unrestricted diet, as he had been on, and really had resolution over the months of many of the symptoms he had been experiencing. He reported decreased anxiety, feeling a lot better, less depression, less problems with the phobias, improved mental clarity, and attention span. He entered a community college program and was able to complete a training program and secured full-time employment. And when I asked him several years into this, after he'd been on Kuvan for several years, what do you think is the most significant change? What is the most significant difference that you notice? He said, you know, before I started, I wasn't able to sit still long enough to read a book. I hadn't read a book in years, and since I've been on Kuvan, I've read 200 books. I mean, it was huge difference. So made a big difference in his life. And so for him, the purpose of going on the medication was control of blood Phe levels, something that's important in every case, and also improvement in clinical symptoms of PKU. Here's another example of a patient who was in a little different situation. This is a boy I've taken care of for many, many years. And just as Kuvan was about to get FDA approval, when we were involved in what was called an expanded access program where we could give it to patients outside of the clinical trials, he came in for a visit. He was just about to start college. He was 18 years old, and we explained that he could try Kuvan now if he would like. He had always maintained excellent blood Phe levels in the lower end of the treatment range. His mother was very, very, compliant and meticulous about things. He had become that way as he had gotten older. He had relatively mild PKU and had a diet prescription of 1,000 milligrams of Phe, which is very liberal compared to many patients, but he still really liked the idea of being able to eat more, to be able to have, less dietary restrictions. So he wanted to try Kuvan. He did so, and he had a good response. As I mentioned before, his previous diet prescription was 1,000 milligrams Phe from food, 70 grams of protein from formula. Now, on Kuvan, his levels remain very well controlled, but he now eats a normal diet, basically. He eats anything. He goes out and has a steak dinner. He has been completely unrestricted throughout college, and I remember the time we told him as we just gradually, we kept adding a little bit more Phe, a little bit more Phe, a little bit more Phe. His levels remained good. We finally said, okay, now you can eat meat. He screamed. He was just so incredibly excited. So this is a little different kind of situation where we now have a patient with mild PKU where we were able to obtain diet liberalization and a larger portion, really all of the diet, in his case, coming from natural proteins. And we know there's a difference for your body in terms of general health, whether you're using synthetic proteins versus natural proteins, and we'll hear more about that tomorrow from Ronnie Singh. Now that's an uncommon situation that I just described to you. Most patients who are treated with Kuvan are not able to eat an unrestricted diet. In the very large majority of cases, some Phe restriction continues to be necessary. So we saw two examples of where we didn't need Phe restriction, both with milder forms of PKU. I think this is a more typical Kuvan responsive patient. Here, this is a little boy also from our clinic who had kind of moderate PKU, I'd say. He was 5 years old when he started on Kuvan. His prescription for Phe prior to starting was 450 milligrams a day. Again, he was a patient who was very well controlled. And on Kuvan, we were able to increase his dietary fee prescription to 1,300 milligrams a day while maintaining very good blood Phe levels. And so that made a big difference, because once you get to 1,300 milligrams, well, you can really count grams of protein instead of milligrams of Phe, so we converted the family over to using grams of protein. That's like 26 grams of protein, and the diet becomes easier to calculate and manage. And grandma can do it better, and relatives, they can read food labels and see how many grams of protein are in there. You're not so married to your low-protein food lists, and he's able to eat much more natural protein. He's able to eat many more natural foods. He still doesn't eat meat to any significant extent, although every now and then he might have a chicken nugget, but he is eating more regular breads, regular pastas, regular peanut butter, things like that. So he has a much more natural diet, no reliance anymore on low-protein food products. He's able to get all of his protein needs from the natural diet. And I think that's more what we experience most commonly, that we still have to have some Phe restriction, but not as much so as in the patient who's not on the medication. Okay, well, all drugs have side effects. We've seen the positive benefits of Kuvan, but what about the side effects? It's been extremely encouraging to know that during the clinical trials and now in 3 years of clinical practice, no serious side effects have been identified in patients taking Kuvan. The safety profile of the drug is really excellent when we compare it with other drugs on the market. There are occasional mild side effects, and the most common ones are GI irritation, stomach upset, heartburn, diarrhea, nausea. Particularly when patients first start the medication, that can occasionally occur. It's usually avoidable if you take it with food or formula. Helps kind of coat the stomach. But if patients do have mild GI complaints, if they're mild enough, I usually just tell them, if it's not so troublesome that you feel like we need to do anything, let's just see what happens. And most of the time, within a week to 10 days, they go away. In a couple cases, I've reduced the dose and worked them back up, and everything's been fine. So I've never seen a patient who could not tolerate the medication because of any side effects. Another question has come up, and that is, does Kuvan have beneficial neurocognitive effects outside of those that we can readily attribute to lowering of the blood Phe level? Obviously, maintaining a lower blood Phe level is going to have positive neurocognitive effects. We know very well what happens, and some of you in the room can attest to what happens when your Phe levels are consistently high. Well, it clouds your thinking, and you have all the kinds of symptoms we've been talking about. But could the medication have some effects even if you don't see that lowering of blood Phe level? There have been some anecdotal reports that suggest that the answer to that is yes. I was actually talking with a lady here in the audience who was telling me about her experiences, which her mother confirmed, very compelling that that might be the case. But that hasn't been looked at scientifically to a large extent as yet. There are some studies in progress, however, that will hopefully give us some answers to that question. There are several small studies already going on in school-age patients with PKU looking at specific neurocognitive changes, and in patients with what you might call hyper-Phe, patients with those blood levels between 6 and 10 who haven't previously been treated, where there's kind of a question mark about how much treatment do they need, looking at those patients in the school-age group to see if changes in their neurocognitive performance can be noted, if they are responsive to Kuvan. And BioMarin is actually planning a larger scale clinical trial really to look at this question. So it's an important question. We need more information to really be able to answer it. I mentioned already these studies in progress from Washington University, Desiree White looking at Kuvan treatment. She has a little early suggestive data that suggests there may be changes seen in patients in some of the measures of executive functioning, which we know are affected in PKU, but again, most of the data will be coming out a little further down the line. So let's move on to PEG-PAL. Of course, we are just in the very early stages of investigating the effect of PEG-PAL on humans. You heard from Dr. Stevens of all that went into the development of PEG-PAL as another drug for the treatment of patients with PKU. He told you that PAL, or the phenylalanine ammonia lyase, is an enzyme that's normally not present in humans. It's present in plants, in bacteria and yeast and lower organisms, and it breaks down Phe in a totally different way. It doesn't rely on PAH, the enzyme that's altered in patients with PKU. So giving it to a patient is like giving them a totally new and different way of breaking down phenylalanine. And because of the fact that we don't like foreign stuff coming into our bodies, whether it's bacteria or infections, viruses, or foreign proteins like PAL, and our natural tendency is going to be to fight them off and get rid of them by making antibodies. They have, as he showed you, coated the molecule in this stuff called polyethylene glycol, PEG, to kind of fool the body's immune system. So we don't see it and recognize it as being something foreign and let it do its job and hopefully protect us from making antibodies that would either inactivate the enzyme or cause an allergic reaction in the patient. As he told you, animal studies showed that PEG-PAL was effective in controlling blood Phe levels in the PKU mouse. And so given that very strong basic science data, the animal data, then the drug came to the point where it could be tried in humans. It is an investigational drug currently. It's only available in the context of clinical trials, and the clinical trials are still in a pretty early stage. So we don't really know now if PEG-PAL, is going to be on the market. If it is, when that would happen. Drug trials to produce the data that then goes to the Food and Drug Administration for review, where they make a decision, is this a drug that's safe and effective and can be marketed? They very often are conducted in phases, and the first phase, phase 1, is really focused on safety. It's the first time the drug goes into human beings, so you want to look really, is this something we can even give to a human? Is it safe? That's really the question you're trying to answer in a phase 1 trial. And the phase 1 study of PEG-PAL has been completed now in PKU patients, and the results were such that it looked like this should be something that continues on. There were no safety issues identified that would preclude going on to the next phase of the studies, which are called the phase 2 clinical trials. So now patients are being enrolled in the phase 2 clinical trials, and that trial is looking both at safety and now more at how well the drug works, because whereas in the phase 1 trial patients only got one shot, one injection, now patients are getting multiple injections over time. So we don't have data yet from the phase 2 trial, but it's ongoing, and hopefully over the course of the next year or so, a lot more information will be gathered with regard to how well PEG-PAL works and what side effects, if any, might be observed in patients with PKU. And of course, with regard to side effects, the main thing that we're worried about is allergic reactions, naturally. So How does PEG-PAL differ from Kuvan? We talked about how Kuvan works and who it works for. Theoretically, PEG-PAL should work for any PKU patient. It should lower blood Phe in anybody you give it to because it's a totally different way of breaking down Phe. You don't have to activate anything that's left in your body. It's not dependent on what mutations you have or how much enzyme activity you have left of the PAH. Has nothing to do with that. It's a totally different way of breaking down Phe. Right now, it's being given as an injection. So the patients in the clinical trials are receiving subcutaneous injections. And again, since it's a foreign protein, some side effects due to allergic reactions would not be unanticipated. We don't know yet whether there are going to be any. But if there were some, that wouldn't be an unexpected thing. The question just is, if there are some, how, are they mild enough that they're easily treated, easily managed, something that we do deal with other drugs that we give to patients with metabolic disorders where we're putting in foreign proteins, or are there other more significant issues? And those are the questions really that have to be answered in the clinical trials. Now let me move on and talk to you for a few minutes about the home blood Phe monitoring system that's being developed by BioMarin. So that is a very popular thing, it sounds like. I know in our clinic, for years people have been asking, well, can't we do this at home like the diabetics? Isn't there some machine we can use? And I always used to say, well, measuring Phe is a lot more complicated than measuring glucose, and it is, certainly, but fortunately, it looks like we are going to be able to have a home blood Phe monitoring system. BioMarin has made that commitment, and they were generous enough to share this slide with me, which gives you a little feel for what the system might look like. They are hoping that this will be out there and in the clinics by early 2011. Of course, we can't say for sure exactly when, but that's not that far away. So it is an exciting development. And the blood Phe monitoring system will be similar in concept to what is available for diabetics for measuring blood glucose. In other words, the idea is that you can use it at home. Of course, we can use it in the clinic too, but it will be easy enough that you can use it at home, small, compact, and give you an instant or very quick results. So the way that a system like this will work is that there will be disposable test strips. Probably many of you have seen how diabetics do their tests. There's a little strip that has the chemicals on it that are necessary to do the measurement. You put a little drop of blood on it, and then you put it in the machine. The machine does the work and then spits out a test result. So in this case, that's what you'll do. You prick the finger the same as you do now for your blood tests, although you will need a lot less blood than you have to dab on those filter papers. So you won't be getting those calls from our clinics, your sample was QNS, not enough. So you just need one little drop, and you'll put that drop on the test strip, and then less than 1 minute later, the Phe result will appear on a screen. And the other great thing is that the machine is going to be storing the test results. So not only will you see your immediate test result, but later on you'll be able to print out, what your results have been at different times and share that data, for example, with your clinic. So this is going to be, I think, a fantastic thing. So it's going to allow for more frequent blood Phe determinations. I mean, it's great if all of you PKU patients comply with what we tell you to do, which is send a blood test every 2 weeks if you're older, maybe weekly when you're younger. But even then, we don't really have that good a sense of how much variability is going on between those blood tests. You don't really get your results until a week later, and by then you've kind of forgotten what you were doing at the time, what you were eating. Maybe you didn't do a very detailed diet record. So it'll be really great feedback to get those instant test results. And I'm very curious to see how it's going to impact compliance with treatment among patients, and how it's going to affect, your psyches. I mean, when you see that test result, what are we going to see happening in terms of behavior and so forth? So it's going to be, I think, a huge thing and very important, and I know a lot of you are going to like that less blood needed part, because sometimes it's hard to get enough to fill up those circles. Okay, so just to summarize then what we've talked about, we now have multiple options for controlling blood Phe in patients who come to us for treatment. We're going to hear about more of them. I've only touched on the drugs that are either available now or in development. In the home monitoring, we're going to hear about other things that are so important, like the large neutral amino acids. So just like we have in treating other medical conditions now, whether it's high blood pressure, we have many different ways we can go, depending on the individual patients, the needs of the patient, the specifics of their condition. Sometimes we're going to use several of these strategies together. Most of the time, for example, with Kuvan, we're using Kuvan and dietary Phe restriction and other food products. So we are in a position where we can individualize our treatment to the specific patient, and that's really a terrific thing. So we really should no longer be thinking that outcomes that are good enough are really good enough for our patients. I really feel like there was a lot of complacency for a while in PKU treatment, in that patients were doing great compared to how they used to do before we had dietary therapy and newborn screening and so forth. But there's still issues. I mean, we hear from some of our adults, what those issues are and so forth. And all of our patients really deserve to function at their absolute best. That's what I'm always telling my kids in clinic. If you're destined to be the next Michael Jordan, well, by God, I want to make sure that happens. And if you are destined to find the cure for PKU or some other disorder, by the same token, I want to make sure that that absolutely happens, that they all really function at their absolute maximum potential. And I feel like for PKU patients now and for their families, the future is incredibly bright. There's so much happening. We're going to hear more about it. I'm excited about it, and I'm excited to be here. So thank you for your attention, and I'm going to pass it along to the next speaker.